Sarah Martinez stood in the employee locker room of St. Vincent's Hospital, staring at her reflection in the scratched mirror. Her hands trembled as she clipped the hospital badge to her navy scrubs for the third time, unable to get it straight. The plastic card felt heavier than it should, like a weight pressing against her chest. The name printed in bold letters, Sarah Martinez, RN, was supposed to represent freedom, a fresh start. Instead, it felt like a lie she'd have to defend with every breath. At 28 years old, she'd finally achieved what she'd told everyone was her lifelong dream, becoming an emergency room nurse. The truth was far more complicated, but no one needed to know that. Not yet, maybe not ever. Taking a deep breath, Sarah smoothed down her scrubs and forced herself to walk through the locker room door. The moment she stepped into the bustling corridor of St. Vincent's emergency department, the familiar chaos of a hospital engulfed her. Nurses rushed past with clipboards and medication carts. Doctors barked orders into phones. Somewhere down the hall, a patient moaned in pain. The sharp scent of disinfectant mixed with the underlying smell of coffee and stress. This was her world, or at least it used to be. "You must be Sarah," a warm voice cut through her spiral of anxiety. Sarah turned to see a petite Asian woman in her early 50s approaching with an outstretched hand and a genuine smile. Her badge read, "Patricia Chen, head nurse. Welcome to St. Vincent's. We're so glad to have you on the team." Sarah shook her hand, managing a small smile. "Thank you, I'm excited to be here." Patricia's grip was firm and reassuring. Her dark eyes were kind but sharp, the eyes of someone who'd seen everything a hospital could throw at her and survived. "First day jitters?" she asked, noticing Sarah's pale complexion. "Is it that obvious?" Sarah tried to laugh, but it came out shaky. "Honey, I've been doing this for 28 years. Everyone's nervous on their first day. Come on, let me show you around before the evening shift gets crazy." Patricia led her through the emergency department, pointing out the trauma bays, the supply rooms, the break area that smelled perpetually of burnt coffee, and the medication dispensary. Sarah followed quietly, absorbing every detail while keeping her responses minimal. When they passed the security desk, she noted the cameras, the exits, the blind spots. Old habits died hard. "You're awfully quiet," Patricia observed as they walked toward the nurse's station. "Most new nurses can't stop talking nerves, you know, but you seem thoughtful." Sarah's stomach tightened. She couldn't afford to stand out, to be memorable. "I'm just trying to take it all in," she said carefully. "I want to do well." Patricia patted her shoulder. "You'll do fine. Your references were excellent and we need good people, especially on Friday nights. That's when things get interesting around here." They reached the central nurses' station, a circular desk surrounded by computer monitors, phones, and stacks of patient charts. 3 other nurses were already there, preparing for the shift change. Patricia introduced them. Marcus, a tall man in his 30s with kind eyes. Jennifer, a blonde woman about Sarah's age who looked perpetually exhausted. And Tom, an older nurse who barely looked up from his charting. "Sarah's starting tonight," Patricia announced. "Be nice to her." Jennifer gave her a tired smile. "Good luck. Fridays are brutal." Dr. Richard Kowalski, a silver-haired emergency physician, approached the station with a coffee cup in hand. "Fresh meat?" he asked, looking Sarah up and down with professional assessment. "Dr. Kowalski, this is Sarah Martinez, our new RN," Patricia said. He extended his hand. "Welcome aboard. Where'd you train?" Sarah had rehearsed this answer 100 times. "Community college in Wisconsin. Then I worked at a clinic in Milwaukee for a couple of years before moving here to Chicago." It wasn't entirely a lie. She had worked at a clinic in Milwaukee, though not as who she was now. The key to a good cover story was keeping it simple, boring, forgettable. "What brought you to Chicago?" Dr. Kowalski asked, sipping his coffee. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. These were the questions she dreaded, the ones that required her to build her fake life in real time. "I needed a change of scenery," she said with a practiced smile. and St. Vincent's has an excellent reputation. Well, you picked the right place to work if you don't mind chaos, he said with a chuckle before walking away. Patricia guided Sarah to a computer terminal and logged her into the system. You'll start by shadowing me for the first few hours, then we'll see how you do with some basic cases. Nothing too intense tonight, hopefully. As Patricia explained the charting system and protocols, Sarah found herself only half listening. Her eyes kept drifting to the windows overlooking the parking lot, scanning for unfamiliar vehicles, for anyone who might be watching. She caught herself and forced her attention back to Patricia's instructions. "Sarah, did you hear what I said?" Patricia was looking at her with concern. "I'm sorry, yes, documentation within 30 minutes of administering medication," Sarah repeated automatically. Patricia studied her for a long moment. "Are you sure you're okay? You seem distracted." "I'm fine," Sarah lied, offering what she hoped was a reassuring smile. "Just first-day nerves like you said." But Patricia's expression suggested she didn't entirely believe her. Sarah could see the questions forming behind those observant eyes. She'd have to be more careful. Blending in meant being present, engaged, normal, everything she hadn't truly been in 7 long years. The wall clock read 7:45 p.m. 15 minutes until her shift officially started. Sarah picked up a patient chart, focusing on the medical details to calm her racing thoughts. A 45-year-old male with chest pain, possible cardiac event. The familiar medical terminology grounded her, reminded her of who she used to be before everything fell apart. "All right, team," Patricia called out to the gathered nurses. "Let's have a good shift. Stay sharp, stay safe, and remember, we're here to save lives." Sarah whispered the last 3 words along with her. "We're here to save lives." If only they knew how much that phrase meant to her. How saving lives was the only thing that made the running, the hiding, the constant fear worthwhile. How medicine was the one true thing left in a life built on lies. The evening began quietly, a sprained ankle, a child with a fever, an elderly woman with dehydration. Sarah moved through her tasks with careful precision, neither too fast nor too slow, competent but not remarkable. Patricia watched her work, occasionally nodding with approval. "You've got good instincts," Patricia commented after Sarah successfully started an IV on a difficult patient. "That was a tricky stick." Sarah's hands had been steady, her technique flawless. Years of advanced training wanted to burst through, but she held it back. "Thank you," she said simply. As the clock struck 9:30 p.m., the emergency department settled into a steady rhythm. Sarah allowed herself to relax slightly, thinking maybe this fresh start would actually work. Maybe she could finally stop running. Maybe, just maybe, she could build a normal life here in Chicago. She had no idea that in 17 minutes, everything would change forever. At exactly 9:47 p.m., Sarah was restocking gauze in Trauma Bay 3 when the world exploded into chaos. The emergency alert system screamed to life, its piercing wail cutting through every conversation, every heartbeat, every breath in St. Vincent's Hospital. Sarah's hands froze mid-reach, her entire body going rigid as the automated voice blared through the overhead speakers. "Attention all personnel, mass casualty incident, commuter train derailment, multiple VICTIMS inbound. All available staff report to emergency department immediately. This is not a drill." The announcement repeated, but Sarah was already moving. Around her, the emergency department transformed in seconds. Nurses who'd been chatting at the station sprinted in different directions. Doctors abandoned their current patients to lesser staff. The orderly hum of a normal Friday evening shattered into controlled pandemonium. Patricia appeared beside her, her face set in grim determination. "Sarah, I need you to help set up additional trauma bays. We're about to get slammed." "How many victims?" Sarah asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Dispatch says the train was carrying over 200 passengers. 3 cars derailed completely, 2 more partially off the tracks. It happened just 3 blocks from here. Patricia's eyes met hers. This is going to be bad, really bad. Sarah nodded, pushing down the instinct to run, to hide, to disappear before things got complicated. Instead, she grabbed an equipment cart and began setting up the secondary trauma bay with swift, efficient movements. Her hands had stopped trembling. Something else was taking over, something she'd tried to bury for 7 years. The first siren wailed outside, then another, and another. Within minutes, the ambulance bay became a war zone. Paramedics burst through the doors pushing gurneys, their voices urgent and overlapping. Female, approximately 30, crush injury to lower extremities, BP 80 over 50 and dropping. Male, mid-60s, head trauma, GCS of 8, unresponsive. We've got a pregnant woman, 3rd trimester, possible placental abruption. Multiple pediatric patients incoming, ETA 2 minutes. The emergency department flooded with humanity in its worst state. Blood-soaked clothing, twisted limbs, faces contorted in agony. The smell hit Sarah like a physical force, copper and fear and diesel fuel. People were crying, screaming, some eerily silent in shock. It was carnage. Dr. Kowalski stood in the center of the chaos, directing traffic like a general in battle. Priority 1 to trauma 1. Jennifer, take the head injury to Bay 4. Marcus, I need you on the crush victim. Sarah stood frozen for just a heartbeat, watching the mayhem unfold. This was beyond anything she'd told them she could handle, beyond what a first-day nurse with a few years of clinic experience should be able to manage. But it wasn't beyond what Dr. Sophie Brennan could do. Sarah, Patricia's voice cut through her paralysis. I need you on triage. Start sorting patients by severity. Something inside Sarah cracked open. 7 years of restraint, of playing small, of hiding her capabilities. It all fell away. She grabbed a triage clipboard and moved into the stream of incoming patients with a confidence that would have shocked anyone who'd watched her timid introduction just hours earlier. A paramedic wheeled in a teenage boy, maybe 16, his face already turning blue. Airway compromise, possible tracheal injury from impact. Sarah was there in an instant, her trained eyes assessing the situation in seconds. She could see what the paramedic couldn't: the subtle deviation of his trachea, the pattern of his labored breathing, the slight swelling that indicated his airway was collapsing. Trauma Bay 2 now, she commanded with authority that made the paramedic snap to attention. Get me an intubation kit and page anesthesia. She didn't wait for permission. She ran alongside the gurney, her fingers already checking his pulse, her mind calculating oxygen saturation without needing to see the monitor. When they reached the bay, she was ready. Dr. Kowalski appeared beside her. What have we got? 16-year-old male, tracheal deviation suggesting developing airway obstruction, needs immediate intubation, Sarah rattled off with precision. Sats are dropping. He's at 88% and falling. The doctor looked at her sharply, surprised by her assessment, but nodded. Prep him. Sarah's hands moved with mechanical precision, positioning the boy's head, preparing the laryngoscope. When the doctor's hands fumbled with the tube, his fingers shaking from adrenaline, Sarah steadied his wrist without thinking. Slightly higher angle, she said quietly, guiding his hand. There. The tube slid in perfectly. The boy's chest rose. His color began to return. Dr. Kowalski stared at her. Where did you say you worked before? Sarah's heart hammered, but she kept her face neutral. A clinic, Milwaukee. He opened his mouth to ask more, but another ambulance arrival pulled him away. Patricia appeared at Sarah's elbow, her eyes wide. That was impressive. Have you done that before? Just training, Sarah stammered, trying to dial back her competence. But it was too late. The genie was out of the bottle. Another paramedic shouted from the entrance. Female, late 20s, arterial bleed from glass laceration. She's losing a lot of blood fast. Sarah moved before anyone else could react. The woman on the gurney was pale, her left arm wrapped in blood-soaked towels that were already saturated. Sarah peeled back the makeshift bandage and saw the problem immediately. A deep laceration had nicked the brachial artery. Blood pulsed out with each heartbeat. Without hesitation, Sarah applied direct pressure with one hand while grabbing supplies with the other. "I need a pressure dressing, 4x4s, and Page vascular surgery now." A nurse she didn't know stared at her. "Shouldn't we wait for?" "Now," Sarah's voice was commanding, absolute. The nurse scrambled to obey. Sarah's fingers found the pressure point, stopping the bleeding with practiced precision. She'd done this maneuver hundreds of times in her previous life, saving trauma patients from bleeding out on operating tables. Her muscle memory took over completely. "You're going to be okay," she told the woman who was fading in and out of consciousness. "Stay with me. Look at my eyes, that's it. You're doing great." Patricia watched from a few feet away, her expression unreadable. This wasn't the nervous first-day nurse from an hour ago. This was someone else entirely. The next 90 minutes became a blur of blood and adrenaline, and decisions made in split seconds. Sarah moved from patient to patient like a force of nature. An elderly man came in with abdominal pain. She spotted the signs of internal bleeding before the CT scan confirmed it, getting him to surgery in time. A pregnant woman arrived seizing. Sarah managed her airway while monitoring fetal heart tones, her commands so precise that the obstetrics team arrived to find everything already under control. Other nurses began directing critical patients to her station specifically. "Get Sarah," became the refrain. "The new girl, she knows what she's doing." But with each successful save, Sarah felt the walls closing in. She was being seen, being noticed, being remembered, everything she'd spent 7 years trying to avoid. At 11:52 p.m., the last critical patient was stabilized. The emergency department began to settle, though it still looked like a war zone. Bloody footprints on the floor, discarded medical supplies everywhere, exhausted staff leaning against walls. Sarah stood in trauma bay 2, staring at her blood-stained scrubs, her hands finally beginning to shake again. She'd saved them, so many of them, but at what cost? Patricia approached slowly, her eyes searching Sarah's face. 20 patients came through those doors coded critical tonight. 17 of them passed through your hands. She paused. "Sarah, who are you really?" Before Sarah could answer, Dr. Kowalski joined them, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and awe. "I've been doing emergency medicine for 22 years. What you did tonight, that wasn't clinic experience. That was advanced trauma training, surgical precision." Sarah's mouth went dry. She could feel her carefully constructed world beginning to crack. "I just did what needed to be done," she whispered. But she could see in their eyes that they didn't believe her. And worse, tomorrow when the news crews came calling, her face would be everywhere. The thought made her blood run cold. She'd been invisible for 7 years. After tonight, she'd be impossible to miss. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat in her small studio apartment on the outskirts of Chicago, still wearing her blood-stained scrubs, staring at her burner phone. The cheap flip phone had only 3 numbers programmed into it: her mother's burner, an emergency contact for her daughter Emma, and a lawyer she prayed she'd never need to call. Her hands shook as she dialed her mother's number. It rang 4 times before a cautious voice answered. "It's me," Sarah whispered. "Mom, something happened." There was a sharp intake of breath. "Are you safe? Is Emma?" "Emma's fine. She's with you. She's safe. But Mom, I think I made a mistake, a big one." She explained the train derailment, the saves, the attention. With each word, the weight in her chest grew heavier. Her mother was silent for a long moment after she finished. "Sophie," her mother used her real name, the one Sarah hadn't heard spoken aloud in years. "You couldn't just let people die. You did what you had to do. But they're going to want to celebrate me, put my face in the news. Mom, what if he sees it? What if Marcus? Marcus is busy fighting his own battles, her mother said firmly, though Sarah could hear the fear underneath. But you need to be careful, keep your head down. And Sophie, maybe it's time to think about moving again. The call ended and Sarah sat in the darkness of her apartment, contemplating her next move. She had $3,000 in cash hidden in a false bottom of her suitcase, her emergency escape fund. She had a fake ID ready to go, a bus ticket she could buy with no trail. She'd done it before. She could disappear again. But the thought of running made her throat tight with unshed tears. She was so tired of running. When Sarah walked into St. Vincent's the next morning for her scheduled shift, she knew immediately that something had changed. The lobby was different, more crowded, more energetic. And then she saw why. A camera crew from Channel 7 News was set up near the information desk. A reporter in a burgundy suit was speaking into a microphone, the hospital's glass entrance gleaming behind her. Calling her the Angel of St. Vincent's, Sarah Martinez, a nurse on her very first shift, saved an estimated 20 lives during Friday night's horrific train derailment. Hospital officials say her quick thinking and skilled response made the difference between life and death for dozens of victims. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She turned to leave, but Patricia appeared from around a corner, practically glowing with excitement. "Sarah, there you are. Did you see the news?" Patricia grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the administrative offices. Channel 7, Channel 5, and the Tribune all ran stories about you. The hospital administrator wants to meet with you. And the families, oh Sarah, the families of the people you saved have been calling all morning wanting to thank you. No, the word came out sharper than Sarah intended. "Patricia, I don't want this." Patricia's smile faltered. "What do you mean? Sarah, you're a hero, don't you want to?" "No photos, no interviews, no public anything." Sarah's voice was rising, panic bleeding through. "I just want to do my job, that's all, please." Patricia studied her face, and Sarah could see the head nurse's sharp mind working, filing away this strange reaction. "Okay," she said slowly, "but the hospital director still wants to see you. It's not optional." In Richard Morrison's office, the hospital director sat behind an enormous desk covered with newspapers, all featuring variations of the same headline. "Hero Nurse Saves 20 in Train Disaster." Some had blurry photos from security footage, Sarah's profile, Sarah's back, one grainy shot of her face partially obscured by her surgical mask. "Miss Martinez," Morrison stood, extending his hand with a politician's enthusiasm. "You've made St. Vincent's very proud indeed. We'd like to hold a press conference this afternoon." "No," Sarah remained standing, her body coiled like a spring. "I'm sorry, Mr. Morrison, but I can't do that." His smile wavered. "I understand you're modest, but this kind of positive press is invaluable for the hospital. Donations, community trust." "I said no." Sarah's voice was firm, her eyes hard. "I'm happy to continue working here, but I will not do interviews or press conferences. I will not have my photo taken. If that's a problem, I'll resign right now." Morrison blinked, clearly unused to being refused. He glanced at Patricia, who stood by the door looking troubled. "That's highly unusual. Miss Martinez, can you at least tell me why?" "Personal reasons." Sarah crossed her arms. "That's all I can say." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Finally, Morrison sighed. "Fine, no press conference, but I can't stop the media from reporting on you. The story's already out there." Sarah felt her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "Are they using my photo?" "Just some grainy security footage. Nothing clear," he frowned. "Why, are you in some kind of trouble?" "No," Sarah lied smoothly. "I just value my privacy." But as she left his office, she could feel Patricia's suspicious gaze burning into her back. The rest of the day was torture. Sarah tried to focus on her patients, But every time someone approached her, colleagues wanting to congratulate her, patients' family members wanting to thank her, she flinched. When a Tribune reporter somehow made it past security and approached her in the hallway, Sarah literally ran, ducking into a supply closet and locking the door. She stayed there for 20 minutes, her back pressed against shelves of medical supplies, her breath coming in short gasps. This was a panic attack. She recognized the symptoms because she'd had them regularly for the first 2 years after she'd run. A soft knock made her jump. "Sarah, it's Patricia. Can you let me in?" Sarah debated pretending she wasn't there, but Patricia's voice was gentle, concerned. She unlocked the door. Patricia slipped inside the small closet and closed the door behind her. The space was cramped, lit only by a small fluorescent bulb. She didn't say anything at first, just studied Sarah's face. The red-rimmed eyes, the trembling hands, the pure fear etched into every feature. "Who are you running from?" Patricia asked quietly. Sarah's breath caught. "I don't know what you..." "Don't." Patricia's voice was kind but firm. "I've been a nurse for 28 years. I've seen women running from abusive husbands, people in witness protection, folks hiding from debts or crimes or past mistakes. I know what fear looks like, Sarah, and you're terrified." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. She wanted so desperately to tell someone, to share the burden she'd been carrying alone for 7 years. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. "I can't talk about it," she whispered. "Patricia, please, just let me work. Let me keep my head down and do my job. That's all I want." Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then she did something Sarah didn't expect. She pulled her into a hug. "Okay, I won't push. But Sarah, whatever you're running from, running doesn't solve anything. It just delays the inevitable." Sarah pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Sometimes delay is all you need." "Or sometimes," Patricia said gently, "it just means you're running when the knock finally comes." The words felt prophetic, though Sarah didn't know how prophetic until 3 days later. On Tuesday morning, Sarah arrived for her shift feeling slightly more stable. The media frenzy had died down. The Tribune had moved on to other stories. The security footage photos were too grainy to really identify her clearly. Maybe, just maybe, she was safe. She was restocking trauma bay supplies, her back to the door, when she heard Patricia's voice behind her. "Sarah," there was something in Patricia's tone that made every muscle in Sarah's body tense. "There are 2 people here to see you." Sarah turned slowly, her heart already knowing before her mind caught up. "They say they're from the FBI." The box of bandages Sarah was holding crashed to the floor, scattering across the tiles. Her vision tunneled. Her ears rang. This was it. After 7 years, 3 months, and 16 days of running, hiding, constantly looking over her shoulder, they'd found her. "Where?" Sarah's voice sounded distant, not her own. "The private waiting area. Sarah, are you?" But Sarah was already walking, her legs moving on autopilot. She rounded the corner and saw them immediately. 2 figures in dark suits standing near the window, their postures radiating federal authority. Special Agent James Chen was Asian American, early 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Special Agent Maria Rodriguez was Latina, younger, with a kind face that Sarah suspected could turn hard in an instant. They both held their FBI badges up as she approached. "Sarah Martinez." Agent Chen's voice was professional, neutral. Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity. They knew that wasn't her real name. This was just protocol. "Yes," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I assume you want to talk somewhere private." Agent Rodriguez gestured toward a conference room. "If you don't mind." Sarah glanced back once and saw Patricia standing in the hallway, her face etched with worry and confusion. Other staff members were starting to notice. Marcus the nurse had stopped mid-step. Jennifer was openly starring. Sarah gave Patricia a small, sad smile. Then she followed the agents into the conference room and closed the door on the life she tried so hard to build. The running was finally over. The conference room felt smaller than it was. Sarah, no, Sophie, sat in a plastic chair facing the two FBI agents across a cheap laminate table. Through the window, she could see the hospital continuing its normal rhythm, completely unaware that her entire world was collapsing. Agent Chen placed a manila folder on the table but didn't open it yet. Agent Rodriguez set up a small recording device. The red light blinked to life. "For the record, please state your full legal name," Chen said. Sophie's hands were folded in her lap, white-knuckled. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times over 7 years. In her nightmares, she was always screaming, fighting, protesting her innocence. But now that it was real, she felt strangely calm. Maybe Patricia was right. Maybe running just delayed the inevitable. "Dr. Sophie Ann Brennan," she said quietly. "My legal name is Dr. Sophie Ann Brennan." Agent Rodriguez's expression softened slightly. "Thank you for being honest with us, Dr. Brennan." "It's just Sophie now," she said, her voice hollow. "I haven't been a doctor in 7 years." Agent Chen opened the folder, revealing photographs that made Sophie's stomach lurch. Her old hospital ID from Phoenix Memorial, her medical license, photos of her with Marcus at charity galas, smiling like they were the perfect couple, a picture of 5-year-old Emma taken the day before they disappeared. "Let's start from the beginning," Chen said. "You were a trauma surgeon at Phoenix Memorial Hospital. By all accounts, one of the best they had. Graduated top of your class from Johns Hopkins, completed your residency at Massachusetts General. You had a bright future." Sophie nodded, her throat tight. That life felt like someone else's dream now. "You were married to Marcus Brennan, CEO of Brennan Pharmaceuticals," Rodriguez continued, her voice gentle. "You have a daughter, Emma, who was 5 years old when you disappeared in March 2018. Tell us what happened." Sophie closed her eyes, and suddenly she was back there. 7 years ago, standing in Marcus's home office at 2 a.m., staring at shipping manifests she wasn't supposed to see. "I found out what he was doing," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus's company was manufacturing legitimate pain medication, but he was diverting massive quantities into the black market. Illegal prescriptions, fake distribution channels, even falsifying DEA reports. He was flooding the streets with opioids and making millions." "How did you discover this?" Chen asked. "I was looking for our tax documents. Emma needed her social security number for kindergarten enrollment." Sophie's laugh was bitter. "Such a mundane reason to destroy your life. I found files, shipping records, payment ledgers, communications with distributors. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then it clicked." She remembered the moment of realization, the ice that had flooded her veins. Her husband, the man she'd married, the father of her child, was responsible for the opioid crisis destroying families across the country. How many of the overdose victims she tried to save in her own ER had been using pills that Marcus had illegally distributed? "What did you do?" Rodriguez prompted. "I confronted him." Sophie's voice cracked. "I told him I was going to report him to the DEA, to the police, to anyone who would listen. He laughed at me, said no one would believe me over him, that he had friends in law enforcement, in government, that I was being naive." She'd never forget the cold calculation in his eyes that night. The man she'd loved had been replaced by a stranger who saw her as a problem to be solved. "Then 3 days later, the police showed up at the hospital to arrest me," Sophie continued. "They had evidence that I'd been writing illegal prescriptions for controlled substances, dozens of them over 6 months. My signature, my DEA number, everything perfectly forged. Marcus had used my credentials to cover some of his illegal distribution." Agent Chen nodded. "We've reviewed the original case file. The evidence against you was substantial." "Because he made it substantial." Sophie's voice rose for the first time, pain and anger breaking through. "He had the resources, the connections, the technical capability to frame me perfectly. He planted evidence in my office computer. He had witnesses, people on his payroll, who swore they'd seen me behaving suspiciously. He even had pharmacy records showing I'd called in prescriptions that I never made. "Why didn't you fight it?" Rodriguez asked. "You could have hired lawyers, gone to trial." "I tried." Sophie's hand slammed on the table. "I hired the best defense attorney I could afford, but Marcus's lawyers were better, and he had friends everywhere. My attorney told me I was looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison. And worse, Marcus filed for emergency custody of Emma, claiming I was a drug addict doctor who was a danger to our daughter." The memory of that day still made her feel physically ill. Standing in family court, watching Marcus's lawyers paint her as an unstable, drug-abusing physician while he played the concerned father. The judge had been sympathetic to him. Marcus had that effect on people: charming, credible, successful. "The court granted him temporary custody," Sophie said, her voice breaking. "I had supervised visitation only, and my attorney told me that given the criminal charges and the evidence, I would almost certainly lose Emma permanently. She'd grow up thinking her mother was a criminal. Or worse, Marcus would poison her against me completely." Agent Chen leaned forward. "So you ran?" "So I ran," Sophie confirmed. "I took Emma during one of my supervised visits and we disappeared. I had some money saved, enough to get us started. I knew how to stay hidden, cash only, burner phones, never staying in one place too long. I became someone else. Several someone else's, actually." "Sarah Martinez is your fourth identity," Rodriguez said, consulting her notes. Sophie nodded. "First was Jennifer Carter in New Mexico, then Lisa Wong in Colorado, then Rebecca Sullivan in Wisconsin. Each time I worked enough to save money, kept my head down, moved before anyone could ask too many questions." "And your daughter?" Chen asked. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "Emma's with my mother now in Oregon. She's 12 years old. She thinks her name is Emily Parker and that her mother works for an international aid organization that travels constantly. My mother homeschools her, keeps her isolated. It's no life for a child." The words hung in the air, heavy with guilt and grief. Sophie had saved Emma from Marcus, but at what cost? Her daughter was growing up hidden, without friends, without stability, without a real childhood. "Dr. Brennan, Sophie," Rodriguez's voice was kind. "Marcus Brennan was arrested 6 months ago." Sophie's head snapped up. "What?" Chen slid a newspaper clipping across the table. The headline read, "Pharmaceutical CEO arrested in massive opioid distribution scheme." "A whistleblower from inside his company came forward last year," Chen explained. "Someone with access to all the real records. The DEA built a case, and they arrested him in July. He's currently awaiting trial on 47 federal counts including drug trafficking, conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice." Sophie stared at the article, her hands trembling as she picked it up. Marcus's mugshot stared back at her, older now, his face harder, but still that same cold expression she remembered from the night he'd threatened her. "He's been claiming the evidence against you was fabricated," Rodriguez said. "Part of his defense strategy is to paint himself as the victim of a conspiracy. He says you were actually the one running the illegal operation, and you framed him before disappearing." "That's insane," Sophie breathed. "We know," Chen said, "but without your testimony, it's harder to prove. The prosecutors would love to have you on the stand to refute his claims and provide context about what you discovered." Sophie looked up at them, realization dawning. "That's why you're here. You need me to testify." "Partially," Rodriguez admitted. "But Sophie, you're also wanted for custodial interference, identity fraud, and practicing medicine under false credentials. These are serious federal charges. If you don't cooperate, you're looking at significant prison time." The room spun. Sophie had known this was coming, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real. She could go to prison. Emma could be put into the system. Everything she'd sacrificed could be for nothing. But, Chen said, his voice careful, there are factors in your favor. The original charges against you are being reviewed in light of Marcus's arrest. There's growing evidence you were framed. And then there's what happened Friday night. Sophie looked at him, confused. Rodriguez pulled out another folder. 20 people are alive because of you, Dr. Brennan. We've been contacted by 17 families who want to testify on your behalf. The hospital administrator, despite being furious about the deception, admitted your actions were extraordinary. Even the DA's office is hesitant to prosecute someone who just performed what the media is calling a miracle. It wasn't a miracle, Sophie said quietly. It was just medicine. It's what I was trained to do. Exactly, Chen said. You're a trauma surgeon, one of the best. You saved lives Friday night because that's who you really are. Not Sarah Martinez, clinic nurse. Dr. Sophie Brennan, trauma surgeon. Sophie sat in silence, processing everything. After 7 years of hiding, of being small, of suppressing who she really was, she'd been exposed by the one thing she couldn't suppress, her need to save lives. What happens now? She asked finally. Agent Rodriguez met her eyes. Now, Dr. Brennan, you have a choice to make. Rodriguez pulled out a legal document from her briefcase and slid it across the table. The header read, Cooperation Agreement United States v. Marcus Brennan. We've been authorized by the U.S. Attorney's Office to offer you a deal, she said, her voice professional but not unkind. You testify against Marcus Brennan at his trial. You provide a full account of what you discovered about his illegal operations, what he told you, how he threatened you, and how he framed you. In exchange, we recommend significantly reduced charges. Sophie stared at the document, her vision blurring. The words swam on the page: immunity, testimony, cooperation, sentencing recommendations. It felt surreal. What does significantly reduced mean? She asked, her voice hoarse. Agent Chen leaned back in his chair. The custodial interference charge, that's the big one. Normally, that's up to 5 years federal prison. But given the circumstances of why you ran, the fact that you've kept Emma safe and cared for, and your cooperation, we'd recommend probation instead of prison time. And the identity fraud, the practicing medicine under false credentials. Sophie's heart hammered against her ribs. Identity fraud carries up to 15 years, but again, context matters, Rodriguez said. You weren't stealing someone's identity to commit crimes. You were hiding. As for practicing medicine without a current license, she paused. That's more complicated. Your medical license was never formally revoked, you just stopped using it, but you did practice under false pretenses. I saved 20 people's lives, Sophie said quietly, not as a defense but as a simple statement of fact. Yes, you did, Chen agreed. And that counts for something. The prosecutors know that. The public knows that. Frankly, putting you in prison right now would be a PR nightmare for everyone involved. A doctor who saved 20 people being locked up for hiding from an abusive husband who framed her. That's not a good look. Sophie almost laughed at the cynicism of it, but the sound died in her throat. So this is about optics. No, Rodriguez said firmly. This is about justice. Marcus Brennan destroyed lives with his greed. He flooded communities with opioids, and when his wife threatened to expose him, he tried to destroy her too. We want him in prison for a very long time. Your testimony helps ensure that happens. And what about Emma? Sophie's voice broke on her daughter's name. What happens to my daughter? The two agents exchanged a glance. Chen spoke carefully. That's the complicated part. Legally, Marcus still has parental rights. Even in prison, he could petition for custody to go to a family member, his mother, his brother. The family court will have to sort that out. Sophie felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. You're telling me that after everything, after I testify, after I help put him away, he could still take my daughter from me? We're telling you it's a possibility, Rodriguez said gently. But there are factors in your favor. You've been Emma's primary caregiver for 7 years. She's thriving under your mother's care. And if Marcus is convicted on these charges, a judge is unlikely to award custody to his family. But Sophie, we can't make promises about family court. That's outside our jurisdiction. Sophie put her head in her hands. 7 years. 7 years of running, hiding, sacrificing everything to keep Emma safe. And now she might lose her anyway. How long do I have to decide? She asked, her voice muffled. 48 hours, Chen said. Marcus's trial starts in 6 weeks. If you're going to testify, we need time to prepare. And if I don't cooperate? The silence that followed was answer enough. Rodriguez finally spoke. Then we arrest you today. You'll be charged with custodial interference, identity fraud, and practicing medicine under false credentials. Emma will be placed with Child Protective Services while the courts sort out custody. And Marcus's defense team will use your absence from his trial to bolster his claims that you're the real criminal. It was checkmate. They had her and they knew it. Can I see her? Sophie asked, tears streaming down her face now. Before I decide, can I see my daughter? Agent Rodriguez's expression softened with genuine sympathy. We can arrange a supervised video call with your mother and Emma. But Sophie, you can't tell them about this conversation. Not yet. We can't risk you fleeing again. I'm not going to run, Sophie said, wiping her eyes. I'm so tired of running. That night Sophie sat in her small apartment staring at her burner phone. The agents had given her a number to call for the video chat, scheduled for tomorrow morning. 24 hours until she'd see Emma's face. 7 years of limited contact. Brief phone calls, letters sent through her mother, a few carefully disguised video chats. Never enough. She thought about what testifying would mean, sitting in a courtroom facing Marcus again. His lawyers would try to destroy her credibility. They'd paint her as mentally unstable, a drug addict, a liar. They'd twist everything she said, and she'd have to endure it all while the world watched. But if she didn't testify, Marcus might walk free, and Emma would definitely be lost to her. Sophie walked to her window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere out there, Patricia was probably telling the other nurses what had happened. The FBI showing up, taking Sarah, Sophie, away for questioning. They'd be confused, scared, maybe even angry at her deception. Her phone rang, the burner, not her regular cell. Only 3 people had this number. Mom, Sophie answered, her voice cracking. They called me, her mother said without preamble. The FBI. They told me about the deal. Sophie, what are you going to do? I don't know, Sophie admitted. Mom, I'm so scared. I know, baby, I know. Her mother's voice was thick with emotion. But I need to tell you something. Emma's been asking questions. She's 12 now, she's smart. She knows something isn't right about our life. She knows other kids don't live like she does. Sophie's heart clenched. What kind of questions? About her father, about why we move around, why she can't have friends or go to regular school. Sophie, she's starting to resent the hiding. Last week she asked me if her father was dead. I didn't know what to tell her. Sophie closed her eyes, fresh tears falling. She protected Emma from Marcus, but in doing so, she'd created a different kind of prison. Put her on, Sophie said suddenly. I know they said to wait, but I need to hear her voice. A pause, then footsteps, and a young voice that made Sophie's heart simultaneously soar and break. Mom. Hi, baby, Sophie whispered. How are you? I'm okay. Grandma says you're busy with work. Emma's voice was cautious, the way it always was during their calls. 7 years of coached conversations had made her daughter careful with words. Emma, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you happy? Silence on the other end. Then quietly, I want to go to real school. I want to have friends. I want to stop pretending to be someone I'm not. The words hit Sophie like physical blows. Her daughter, hidden away, isolated, living a half-life because Sophie was too afraid to face her past. What if I told you that might be possible? Sophie asked carefully. But it would mean some big changes, scary changes. Mom, we change things all the time. We move, we use different names, you're always gone. Nothing feels stable anyway. Emma's voice was small but honest. At least this would be changing towards something better, right? 12 years old and already so wise. So tired of running just like her mother. I love you, Sophie said, her voice breaking. No matter what happens, I love you so much. I love you too, Mom. Are you in trouble? Maybe, Sophie admitted, but I'm going to try to fix it, I promise. After they hung up, Sophie sat in the darkness for a long time. She thought about the 20 people she'd saved Friday night, about Patricia's words in the supply closet. Running doesn't solve anything. It just delays the inevitable. She thought about Emma, 12 years old and desperate for a normal life. About Marcus, sitting in a cell, spinning lies about how he was the victim. About all the families destroyed by the opioids he'd distributed while she'd been too afraid to stop him. Sophie pulled out the business card Agent Rodriguez had given her, turned it over in her hands. She'd spent 7 years being afraid, 7 years being small, 7 years hiding from who she really was. Friday night, when 20 lives hung in the balance, she'd remembered. She was Dr. Sophie Brennan, trauma surgeon. She saved lives, that's what she did, that's who she was. Maybe it was time to stop running and start fighting. Sophie picked up her phone and dialed the number. Agent Rodriguez answered on the second ring. I'll do it, Sophie said, her voice steady for the first time in 7 years. I'll testify. Tell me what I need to do. Continue Part 7 1,000 wards separate from all 20. 07 architected narrative continuation featuring legal confrontation and emotional resolution. The user wants me to continue with Part 7, which is about the reckoning based on the original outline. This should be about 1,000 words and cover. Sophie making a deal with the FBI. The legal process beginning. Marcus being confronted with her testimony. The trial or legal proceedings. The difficult road ahead. Reactions from the hospital, the families. Building toward the resolution. I need to make this engaging, emotional, and show the struggle Sophie goes through as she faces her past and fights for her future. A new nurse saved 20 lives in just 2 hours, until the FBI arrived to investigate her past. Part 7, The Reckoning. The U.S. Attorney's Office in downtown Chicago smelled like old coffee and desperation. Sophie sat in a small conference room surrounded by lawyers, her hands folded on the table in front of her as they outlined what the next 18 months of her life would look like. Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who didn't waste time on pleasantries. Marcus Brennan's defense team is going to come at you hard, Dr. Brennan. They'll claim you were the mastermind behind the illegal distribution. They'll say you framed your husband to cover your own crimes. They'll question your mental stability, your fitness as a mother, every decision you've made for the past 7 years. I understand, Sophie said quietly. Do you? Walsh leaned forward. Because understanding intellectually and enduring it in a courtroom are 2 very different things. They'll make you relive your worst moments. They'll twist your words. They'll try to make the jury hate you. Agent Rodriguez, sitting beside Sophie, touched her arm gently. We'll prepare you. We'll go over everything multiple times. You won't be alone in this. Over the next 3 weeks, Sophie's life became a strange contradiction. By day, she worked at St. Vincent's Hospital, though now everyone knew the truth. The hospital board had held an emergency meeting to decide her fate. Patricia had fought for her, along with Dr. Kowalski, and surprisingly, even the hospital administrator Morrison. She lied about her credentials, one board member argued. She put patients at risk. She saved 20 lives, Patricia interrupted sharply. 20 people went home to their families because of her skill. Yes, she lied. Yes, she practiced under false pretenses, but she's also one of the most talented trauma physicians I've ever seen. Are we really going to throw that away? The compromise was this. Sophie could stay on staff, but only in a supervised capacity. She couldn't work as a nurse under her false credentials, but she could work as a medical consultant while her actual medical license status was being reviewed. The pay was minimal, the hours restricted, but it was something. It kept her in Chicago, kept her busy while the legal machinery ground forward. By night, Sophie met with prosecutors. They rehearsed her testimony over and over, preparing her for every possible attack the defense might launch. "When did you first suspect your husband was involved in illegal activities?" Walsh would ask. "February 2018. I found shipping manifests in his home office that didn't match his company's legitimate distribution records." "And what did you do with this information?" "I confronted him. He told me I was being paranoid, that I didn't understand how pharmaceutical distribution worked." "But you didn't believe him." "No, I'm a doctor. I know how controlled substances are supposed to be tracked. What I saw in those files was criminal." Over and over they practiced. Walsh played the role of Marcus's defense attorney, attacking every word, every motive, every decision Sophie had made. "Dr. Brennan, isn't it true that you had access to prescription pads and your own DEA number? Isn't it possible that you were writing illegal prescriptions and blamed your husband when you got caught?" Sophie learned to stay calm, to keep her voice even. "No, that's not what happened." "Isn't it true that you kidnapped your daughter and fled the state to avoid prosecution?" "I took my daughter to protect her from a man who had proven he would destroy anyone who threatened him, including me." It was grueling, exhausting work. Some nights, Sophie lay awake in her apartment, wondering if she had the strength to go through with it. Emma came to Chicago in the 4th week. Sophie's mother brought her, and they stayed in a small hotel near Sophie's apartment. It was the first time Sophie had held her daughter in person in over a year. Emma was 12 now, taller than Sophie remembered, with her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and Marcus's sharp cheekbones. But her eyes, those were Sophie's eyes, warm and curious and filled with questions. "Mom," Emma said, hugging her tightly, "Grandma told me everything, about Dad, about why we've been hiding, about what's going to happen." Sophie pulled back, searching her daughter's face. "Are you okay?" Emma considered the question seriously. "I'm scared, but I'm also relieved. Is that weird, that I'm relieved to finally know the truth?" "No, baby, that's not weird at all." They spent the weekend together, real time, not hurried phone calls or coded messages. They went to Navy Pier, ate deep dish pizza, walked along Lake Michigan. Normal things that they'd been denied for 7 years. And Sophie told Emma everything, age-appropriately but honestly, about Marcus's crimes, about the frame-up, about the choice Sophie had made to run. "I'm sorry," Sophie said on their last evening together. "You deserved a normal childhood, friends, school, stability. Instead, you got this." Emma was quiet for a moment, watching the sunset over the lake. "You saved me, Mom. You gave up everything to keep me safe. I understand that now." She looked at Sophie with eyes far older than 12. "And now you're going to save yourself, and maybe other people too, by stopping Dad." Sophie's throat tightened with emotion. When had her little girl become so wise? Marcus Brennan's trial began on a cold morning in November. The courthouse was packed with media, families of opioid victims, and curious onlookers. Sophie sat in the witness waiting room, her hands clenched in her lap, while Patricia sat beside her for moral support. "You can do this," Patricia said firmly. "You've faced worse." "Have I?" Sophie asked with a shaky laugh. "You saved 20 lives in 2 hours during a mass casualty event. You survived 7 years on the run with a child. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met, Sophie. This is just one more thing you'll survive." When they called her name, Sophie stood on trembling legs. She walked into the courtroom, and for the first time in 7 years, she saw Marcus. He sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, his hair graying at the temples, his expression one of wounded dignity. When their eyes met, his face hardened with pure hatred. Sophie took the witness stand and placed her hand on the Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," she said, her voice clear and strong. For the next 3 hours, Sophie told her story. She described finding the evidence, confronting Marcus, his threats. She detailed how he'd framed her, using her credentials to cover his crimes. She explained why she'd run, how she'd lived, what she'd sacrificed. Marcus's attorney attacked her viciously. "Dr. Brennan, you're a fugitive. You've used multiple false identities. You've lied to employers, to colleagues, to everyone you've encountered for 7 years. Why should this jury believe a single word you say?" Sophie met his eyes steadily. "Because I'm not lying anymore. I spent 7 years hiding from the truth, but I'm not hiding now. Yes, I ran. Yes, I lied, but I never hurt anyone. I never destroyed families for profit. I never put poison into communities. Your client did that. And when his wife threatened to expose him, he tried to destroy her too." The courtroom was silent. 20 people are alive right now because of my skills as a doctor," Sophie continued, her voice gaining strength. "I couldn't save them if I'd been in prison for crimes I didn't commit. I couldn't save them if Marcus Brennan had successfully destroyed my career and taken my daughter. So yes, I ran. And I'd do it again if it meant protecting my child and being able to continue saving lives." When she stepped down from the witness stand 3 hours later, Sophie felt lighter than she had in years. The defense had tried to break her, but she'd held firm. She'd told the truth. Finally, after 7 years of lies and hiding, she'd told the truth. Agent Rodriguez met her outside the courtroom. "You did great in there, really great." "What happens now?" Sophie asked. "Now we wait for the verdict. But Sophie, regardless of what happens with Marcus, you've already won. You stood up for yourself. You told your story. That takes courage." Sophie looked back at the courthouse. Inside, lawyers were already preparing their closing arguments. In a few weeks, a jury would decide Marcus's fate, and in the coming months, courts would decide hers, her custody of Emma, the status of her medical license, whether she'd face prison time or probation. But for the first time in 7 years, Sophie wasn't running from the future. She was walking toward it, head held high, ready to face whatever came next. The reckoning had come, and Sophie had survived it. The jury deliberated for 4 days. Sophie spent that time in a strange limbo, suspended between her past and an uncertain future. She worked her limited hours at St. Vincent's, carefully reviewing trauma protocols and consulting on difficult cases. At night, she sat in her apartment with Emma, who'd come to stay with her while they waited for the verdict. "What if they don't convict him?" Emma asked one evening, curled up on Sophie's small couch. "Then we deal with it," Sophie said, though fear clawed at her chest. "Whatever happens, we face it together. No more running." On the 4th day, Sophie's phone rang. It was Agent Rodriguez. "The jury's back. Verdict in 1 hour." The courtroom was packed when Sophie arrived. She sat in the gallery with Patricia on one side and her mother on the other. Emma had wanted to come, but Sophie had insisted she stay at the apartment. Some things a 12-year-old didn't need to witness. Marcus entered, flanked by his attorneys. He didn't look at Sophie. His face was a mask of confidence, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. The jury filed in, their expressions carefully neutral. Sophie's heart hammered so hard she thought everyone could hear it. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "We have, Your Honor." The forewoman stood, holding a piece of paper that contained the future of so many lives. "On the count of conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, how do you find?" "Guilty." Sophie's breath caught. "On the count of wire fraud?" "Guilty." "On the count of obstruction of justice?" "Guilty." Count after count, guilty, guilty, guilty. 47 charges, and the jury had convicted him on every single one. Marcus's face drained of color. His attorney put a hand on his shoulder, but Marcus shook it off violently. As the bailiffs moved to take Marcus into custody, he finally turned to look at Sophie. The hatred in his eyes was pure and venomous. He mouthed something that looked like, "This isn't over." But Sophie smiled, because it was over. After 7 years, it was finally over. The judge set sentencing for 6 weeks later. Marcus Brennan was remanded to custody without bail. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Sophie had learned to navigate them now, to give brief statements without revealing too much. "Dr. Brennan, how do you feel about the verdict?" "I'm grateful that justice has been served. My hope is that this conviction brings some measure of peace to the families affected by Mr. Brennan's crimes." "What's next for you?" Sophie glanced at Agent Rodriguez, who gave her a small nod. They'd prepared for this question. "Next, I focus on rebuilding my life and my relationship with my daughter, and I hope to return to practicing medicine, which has always been my calling." Marcus's sentencing came in January. The judge showed no mercy. "Mr. Brennan, your crimes have devastated countless families and communities. You exploited your position of trust in the pharmaceutical industry for personal profit. And when your wife threatened to expose you, you attempted to destroy her life through fraud and manipulation. I hereby sentence you to 23 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 18 years. 23 years. Marcus would be 71 when he got out, if he got out. Sophie's own legal reckoning came more gradually, spread out over the following months. For the custodial interference charge, the judge was surprisingly sympathetic. He reviewed the evidence of Marcus's frame-up, heard testimony from Emma's therapist about the positive relationship between mother and daughter, and listened to Sophie's attorney argue that she'd acted to protect her child from a dangerous individual. "Dr. Brennan, what you did was illegal," Judge Martha Hernandez said from the bench. "However, I believe your actions were motivated by genuine fear for your daughter's safety, fear that has been validated by your ex-husband's conviction. I'm sentencing you to 5 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and mandatory family counseling. Custody of Emma Brennan is awarded to you, with your mother approved as alternate guardian." Sophie wept with relief. Emma, sitting in the gallery, cried too. The identity fraud charges were handled separately. Another judge, less sympathetic, sentenced Sophie to 3 years probation running concurrent with her other sentence, plus restitution to the institutions where she'd worked under false pretenses. The financial penalty was steep, but Sophie would pay it gladly. The question of her medical license was the most complex battle. The Illinois Medical Board held a hearing that lasted 2 full days. They reviewed her training, her work history, the circumstances of her flight, and notably, her actions during the train derailment. Dr. Kowalski testified on her behalf. "I've been practicing emergency medicine for over 2 decades. What Dr. Brennan did that night was exceptional. Her instincts, her technical skill, her decision-making under pressure, these are not things that can be taught. They are the hallmarks of an extraordinary physician." Patricia testified too. She may have lied about her name, but she never lied about her commitment to helping people. Every action she took was in service of saving lives. The 17 families whose loved one Sophie had saved submitted written statements. Some even showed up in person, pleading for leniency. "My son is alive because of her," one mother said, her voice breaking. "She intubated him when his airway was collapsing. The other doctors said without her quick action, he would have died within minutes. Please don't punish someone for being heroic." The medical board deliberated for 3 weeks. Their decision was nuanced. Sophie's medical license would be reinstated, but under strict supervision for 5 years. She would be required to complete ethics courses, undergo regular evaluations, and work only in approved settings with oversight. It wasn't full freedom, but it was a path back to her profession. St. Vincent's Hospital, which had stood by her throughout the trial, offered her a position as a supervised trauma physician. The pay was less than what she'd earned before, and the restrictions were frustrating, but Sophie accepted gratefully. 18 months after the FBI had walked into St. Vincent's to find her, Sophie stood in the emergency department locker room, preparing for her first official shift as Dr. Sophie Brennan. Her hands didn't shake this time as she pinned her name tag to her scrubs. The white coat hanging in her locker had her real name embroidered on the chest, Dr. Sophie Brennan, Trauma Medicine. She ran her fingers over the letters, feeling the weight of reclaiming her identity. Patricia found her there, standing in front of her locker with tears streaming down her face. "Hey," Patricia said gently, "you okay?" Sophie nodded, wiping her eyes. "For the first time in 7 years, I'm more than okay. I'm myself again." They walked together to the emergency department. The evening shift was just beginning, familiar chaos, the organized frenzy that Sophie had missed so desperately during her years of hiding. Near the nurse's station, Emma sat in a visitor's chair doing homework. She looked up when Sophie approached and smiled, a real smile, uncomplicated by fear or secrets. "Mom," she said, "your name tag looks good." Sophie touched the badge on her chest. "It feels good, too." Dr. Kowalski approached, reviewing a chart. "Dr. Brennan, we've got a motor vehicle accident coming in. Multiple traumas, ETA 3 minutes. You're taking lead." The words sent a thrill through Sophie's chest. Taking lead. Not hiding in the background, not pretending to be less capable than she was. Leading. "I'm ready," she said. As the sirens wailed in the distance, Sophie moved into position in Trauma Bay 1. The familiar adrenaline surge flooded her system, sharpening her focus, steadying her hands. Emma watched from the doorway, pride shining in her eyes. Her mother, not Sarah Martinez, not any of the other names they'd used over the years, but her real mother, was exactly where she belonged. The ambulance bay doors burst open. Paramedics rushed in with the first patient. Female, early 20s, ejected from vehicle, massive internal bleeding. Sophie was already moving, her voice clear and authoritative. "Get me 2 units O-negative, start a central line and page surgery now. Let's move, people." Her team responded instantly, moving with practiced precision. Sophie's hands flew through the procedures she'd performed thousands of times before, the muscle memory of her true calling flooding back. For 7 years, she'd been running from her past. For 7 years, she'd been someone else. But now, standing in Trauma Bay 1 with her real name on her badge and her daughter watching proudly from the doorway, Sophie Brennan was finally home. The patient's vitals stabilized under her care, another life saved. Sophie looked up at the clock, then at Patricia, who stood nearby with a knowing smile. "Welcome back, Dr. Brennan," Patricia said softly. Sophie smiled, her eyes bright with tears and triumph. "It's good to be back." The end.